Nurses of Reddit, what is the weirdest thing a patient has done while waking up from anesthesia? Story 1. I had a panic attack in the ED, and they gave me a sedative. I think I was really disturbing other patients. Anyway, couple hours of time lost. I get ready for discharge, and I'm going to change. One of the guards, who was NYPD, says, "Do the MC hammer dance again?" Apparently, in my doped-out state, I had complained that the hospital gown bottoms were too baggy in the crotch, and I had MC hammered to the bathroom. I begrudgingly did it again for them. Story 2. My favorite was a huge bearded vet, HX of PTSD, very concerned about waking up. He had apparently gotten a bit aggressive after previous procedures, obviously not his fault. As we're rolling him out of the OR, he kept asking me softly, "Am I waking up okay?" And I'd tell him, "Yeah, buddy, you're doing great." And he'd go, "Oh, okay." Didn't try to get up, no flailing, nothing. He was just cozied up under the warm blankets asking me that question over and over again. By the time we got to PACU, he was on to repeating, "Oh, I just love you guys," every couple of minutes. Adorable. Answer. Last time I went under anesthesia, I woke up and asked my wife, "Did I say anything funny while I was waking up?" Her, "No, honey." Me, still loopy. Haha, that's funny. Apparently, I repeated this about a dozen times. It was only funny to her the first couple times, but I kept cracking myself up. I'm lucky my wonderful wife is so patient with my goofy jerk. Story 3. I'm not a nurse, but my roommate was during pandemic. She helped me schedule my upper GI endoscopy at the practice where she worked and perform my upper GI endoscopy. I was waking up from the propofol, and apparently I was all over the cute anesthesiologist, squeezing his bicep and saying, "Oh, Dr. Rodriguez, you're so nice and strong." Mortifying. Answer. I was in the ER for kidney stones, though at the time we didn't know it was that, just that I woke up in excruciating pain and that it could have been ovarian torsion. Totally out of it and unwilling to filter myself BC of how much pain I was in, and the very attractive doc came by right as the nurse was giving me some more morphine. After he told me that my ovaries looked good and IUD was in the right place, I blurted out, "Thank you, dear handsome." Story 4. Patient. Damn, they gave me the hot nurse. That nurse before I went under was mean and kinda ugly. Hey guy, that was also me. Patient. No shoot? Those are some strong fudge beer goggles. Hey, get my wife in here. I want to see if she's hot too. Also, they cry. Like a lot. Bate. For those of you that cried, it's called emergence delirium and is really common, especially in kids and young people, hence why it's often for wisdom tooth extraction. Also, it's more common with laughing gas. There's also emergence agitation, which is a little more traumatic and can be dangerous since it usually involves kickboxing and alligator rolls. Answer. When I got my wisdom teeth out, I woke up and started laughing uncontrollably after asking my mom when they were going to start BC. It felt like no time had passed. My recovery nurse said to my mom, "She's going to start crying in 3, 2, 1. And I kid you not, I began to sob at the exact moment she indicated. It's been more than 20 years, and I'm still impressed. Lol. Story 5. The surgeon who took out my wisdom teeth is a close friend of mine and my husband's. As I was waking up, evidently, I looked at my friend and menacingly shook my finger and said, "I don't like him." He and my husband got a very good laugh out of it. We're still friends. Story 6. I woke up from surgery next to a man talking about serving in World War II training dogs, on and on about his favorite dog named Rufus. They took him to the next room, and I told the nurse he'd had an interesting life. The nurse laughed and said the guy was only about 40 years old. This was in 2019. Definitely wasn't in WW2. Story 7. Patient. I've had multiple incredibly long surgeries because of endometriosis. During my first few, I was working on a project with a Romanian. I knew enough of the language to be polite, but it was super shoot Romanian. Woke up only able to speak in shoot Romanian for a good hour. After that, I had a thick accent for another few hours. Freaked some of the nurses out. Edit. Thanks for the award, kind stranger. Answer. Hey, twin. I had 2 endometriosis-related surgeries within about a year and a half of each other. I don't remember anything remarkable about the first one, but was told that after the second one, I spent hours telling all of the medical staff that they'd all done a great job to the point that it was probably obnoxious. My mom said that I just kept telling them all how nice they were and how good they were at their jobs. And when one would come in to check on me, asking them to remind the other staff again that I thought they were doing a great job. I was 22. My mom said that they probably thought it was sweet, but I still cringe a little sometimes. Story 8. As the patient, after getting my wisdom teeth taken out as a teen, I had absolute confidence that I was fine walking to the car and apparently took insult from the nurse and my mom helping me to walk. Spoilers, I was not fine. I had almost no balance and made it 5 feet down the hall with a passing grip on the railing to support my non-compliant legs. I promptly fell asleep and woke up again as we were pulling into our garage. Answer: same here. After getting my wisdom teeth out, I woke up to no one in the room with me. I felt fine, so I got up and almost made it outside the clinic before it felt like the world turned sideways and I collapsed to the ground. I didn't fall asleep again, but my mom and a nurse were trying really hard not to laugh as they helped me up when they found me a minute later. Story 9. I woke up from a same-day wrist surgery, and when they moved me from lying on a gurney to sitting in a chair, I announced to the room at large, "Whoa, I am fudge up." I cackled and said it again, and I enunciate clearly and can project to the cheap seats. Story 10. Anesthesiologist here. Young woman had a breast aug. She got a pre-med that was potently amnestic. She woke up in recovery and asked when we were going to the OR. We explained we were already done. She didn't believe us at all. One of the recovery nurses lifted the neck of her gown and said, "Look." The only thing she said after looking was, "Who?" Answer: when I was going in for my hysterectomy, my mom was with me in pre-op, and they gave me something they said was going to make me forget. Not long after that, my mom said, "Okay, you're going to forget this, right? Don't tell anyone, but you're the favorite child." Needless to say, I did in fact remember that interaction. I feel bad for my sister more than I feel proud of myself on that one. Story 11. I used to work in a recovery ward where we'd help patients who'd had same-day procedures get oriented before they could go home. There have been some funny ones. Once, I was helping to transfer a patient into a reclining chair, and she was saying she was really glad for our help. But how she expressed it was, "You're the best, you're an angel," or even better, a stripper. I've also heard, "I would like another Mai Tai. Where's Keanu Reeves? And did I do Molly again?" Answer: silly question, but how do you know when someone has woken up? Are you always keeping that close of an eye on your patient? When I woke up from day surgery, gallbladder, I remember opening my eyes and trying to see the clock on the wall to know what time it was, but my vision was blurry. A nurse came over to me right away before, as far as I am aware, said anything or tried to move. I always wondered how she knew I had woken up. Story 12. Been a patient twice. First time I kept waking up, desperately thanking the nurses and saying, "Oh my God, I'm alive." Passing back out, and I repeated that whole thing maybe 10 times. I only remember it once when I stayed awake, and they laughed and told me I kept saying that and passing out again. Second time I panicked wildly at first because I woke up in extreme pain. Then I made a joke about being even more surprised. I woke up after being told I was in bed 13. The nurse looked personally affronted. Oops. Story 13. Weirdest things I have ever done after waking up from anesthesia is A, ask what happened to my teeth and started crying when they said they took them out, wisdom teeth, and B, cried due to how thankful I was that the nurses were helping me clean up and take care of me. The kicker was that I was crying so hard I started coughing, popped several internal sutures, and had to have an emergency second surgery. Story 14. More cute than weird, but on one of my first medical rotations, I saw a patient who was getting a brain tumor taken out. He had a 6-week-old baby at home. Sweet guy, deep in the newborn trenches at home. He woke up from his anesthesia, shot up to sit on the table and said, "Holy crap, that was the best sleep I've had in 6 weeks." Story 15. I've had varying experiences. First surgery, I was 9, had my tonsils out, and I woke up sooner than I was supposed to, so the nurses weren't in my room and I was screaming at the top of my lungs. It took 2 nurses to get me to lay back down, stop screaming, and stop me from trying to pull all the stuff out of my body. Second surgery, I was 16 or 17, and when I woke up, I started shaking everyone's hands and thanking them for their hard work. Third was my wisdom teeth, and I actually woke up during that surgery. I think I've woken up every time, but I'm not 100 sure. So when I came out, I kept asking if they were still operating or if I was done, and they proceeded to forget what they said, start bawling, and ask again. Story 16. Not right after surgery, but some hours after having part of my trachea removed. I couldn't talk. Surgery was right under my vocal cords. So when I needed to pee in the middle of the night, I'd use my phone to call the nurse's station and would scratch on the receiver or bonk it on the side of my bed so they'd know I was awake. I can't imagine how creepy that would be to just hear scratching on the other end of a phone in the middle of the night. Story 17. In this case, I was the patient, but I woke up after surgery and knew the first and last name of the nurse that was there, despite me never meeting or seeing her before. Scared the absolute shoot out of her. The actual reason I knew was much less exciting, but I don't think I told her how. My best friend was in the nursing program at the time and had told me stories about one of her training nurses. It was an ethnic name, and it was a very white area. My brain just filled in the rest. Story 18. My husband had to have his pinky toes removed. When they brought him into recovery afterwards, they gave him the choice of vanilla or chocolate pudding. He cried because he had to choose which one he wanted. They brought in both, so he was satisfied. He ate the vanilla and then stacked the cups to eat the chocolate. After his was finished, he got this crazy look on his face and yelled at me, "You stole my pudding! How could you do that to me?" I assured him I did not eat his pudding. The nurse came back to check on him, and he informed her that I was thief and needed to be removed. It was a very long ride home. Story 19. After my throat widening and something else to do with my stomach, I woke up to my mom and nurse talking about our dog, and me saying, "Oh, I love Blue. She's the best girl." I was later told that I was saying that line after every time they said something for the last 5 minutes. Oh, and they stopped talking about Blue about 10 minutes ago. Story 20. One surgery, I kept asking if I should be concerned my O2 was so low. No, I didn't need to be concerned. And I also kept asking, when can I go back to my friend? Which is not weird, but it was probably annoying. I asked literally every 5 minutes. They were so sweet, though, and kept bringing me warm blankets. I was the only one awake. Recovery. LOL. Another, I was shaking like crazy and crying for my mommy. I was 40. My mommy was in the waiting room, LOL. Another, I kept telling them I did not, in fact, need to wake up to breathe. I needed to sleep forever and ever. They were not fans of that plan. Story 21. My first knee surgery was the first for an IV and surgery. I had 2 nurses named Richard. When they started giving me the happy juice, I apparently yelled, "2 male body part just popped my cherry." From what my mom told me, the whole pre-surgery area was cracking up. Story 22. I woke up after being sedated to get my wisdom teeth out and apparently would not shut about my husband. My husband got me zoodles and ice cream for later. I love my husband. He's going to set up the Fast Furious movies for me to watch. I love my husband. We snuggle every night. I love my husband. Not surprising when they brought me into the recovery waiting area where he was waiting for me, I apparently excitedly shouted my husband. "That's my husband." Story 23. Patient here. I insisted that I had to go to the library to return my books or they'd be overdue. I started crying because I was convinced that I'd be banned from ever using the library again. Woke up later and tried to read a magazine and kept drifting in and out. Later, upon rereading it, I'd skipped like 7-page chunks here and there. Story 24. Got my wisdom teeth taken out and proceeded to cry at the nurse because I had taken a very long time to grow those and she wouldn't give them back to me. I then came home and proceeded to be terrified of my dog. We've had for 8 years BC. I was convinced he was a small bear. Poor dude was just trying to snuggle me. BC's my ESA, and I was so confused. Story 25. The oral surgeon told me, I said, "This is some good shoot. Can I take some home after removing my wisdom teeth?" I was about 15 and had never done substances, smoked, or drank in my life, so it was an odd thing. My wife, on the other, had stated telling the nurses to let her go and they could fudge off with the handcuffs. She called one a big meanie. She looked at my wife and goes, "It's because you're short." That nurse was her best friend during that hospital stay, and the doctor still updates each other on follow-up visits. Story 26. Not my story, but my sister's. She is a surgical nurse. A few years ago, a young man was waking up from surgery and started crying because they took my male body part. My sister and his mom both kept trying to tell him it was still there. After several attempts of this, my sister finally took his hand and put it on his crotch. He then started crying that it's so small. His mom immediately told his brothers. Story 27. My ortho for my tooth extraction said I had a whole fudge conversation with him while I was under, made him show me the tooth while he was doing it, was remarkably lucid the whole time. I don't remember any of it, of course, but the surgeon commenting on how lucid I was made me laugh. Story 28. My mom woke up and did the obligatory crushing on her male surgeon and telling him so. Then for 5 hours. Her memory would reset every 5 minutes or so and she'd freak out, ask if she had the surgery, ask if it went okay, laugh, cry, try to rip out the IV and climb off the bed, ask if she had the surgery, and so on. For 5 hours, turns out they gave her way too much morphine for a day surgery. A nurse had to help me carry her to the car. We each took an arm. Story 29. Emma Pade's nurse. I met one of the kids in recovery. He was about 10 years old. All his obs were good. I got handover from the theater nurse. The porter arrives, so we start wheeling him back to the ward. By the time we get there, this very English, very innocent young lad is spouting nonsense at the top of his voice in a thick New York accent. I'm gonna shoot your meanie up. You hear me, motherfucker? I'm gonna fudge you all up, etc. whilst doing the pew-pew thing with his Peter Pointer, huh? I had to try to keep a straight face. I failed, while his parents were apologizing profusely. Story 30. Am I the only one waking up feeling nothing but pain? I had an IUD inserted in light anesthesia because it was so painful the first time they tried that I passed out. Woke up from the anesthesia in so much pain that they gave me 2 doses of fentanyl to get me out to the car. My husband was shocked. I've never done substances or any stronger medicine than paracetamol. Answer. The most painful procedure I've ever woken up from was an exploratory laparoscopy to check for endometriosis, negative thankfully. They also performed the Luna procedure where they sever some nerves leading to the uterus by cutting partway through some tendons. I clawed my way to partial consciousness, feeling like there were flames licking the inside of my abdomen. I was taking really shallow, gasping breaths and starting to shake, still barely awake. I'm sure the only reason I was awake was the pain. I opened my eyes but had no vision, and when the nurse asked if I was in pain, I couldn't speak. There was a rush of nurse activity, and I felt something in the IV, and then the pain stopped, and I went back to sleep for a while. I was much more comfortable when I woke up the second time. The whole time, one nurse was holding my hand and soothingly telling me they were getting me pain meds, just hold on, etc. Pretty sure I thought she was a literal angel in the moment. Story 31. Not the nurse, but she sure got a laugh out of this one. I was getting ketamine treatments for chronic pain and depression as part of a research done at a prominent academic hospital. I was on the come up during one session, and I said to the nurse, "Man, I feel like a hexagon." Story 32. I woke up and immediately asked how many people were dead. I had an umbilical hernia surgery, and in my pain of waking up, I guess my brain converted my stomach pain to you were in a really bad car accident, and you hit a lot of pedestrians and eliminate a lot of them. So I kept asking the nurse how many were dead, and she just kept staring at me like, girl, no one is dead. I finally came around later and remembered I had surgery and did not eliminate anyone. Story 33. Not a nurse, but my ex needed a lot of procedures over the years. Woke up and didn't know me, but told me I was pretty. Groggily asked for her phone. When offered it a few seconds later, said, "Get that out of my face," with a laugh, and smacked it across the room. Triumphantly claimed that she was still conscious when she was wheeled in for surgery. She asked why they had clocks on all the walls. She said the anesthesiologist frowned, and then she went out. Groggy and totally out of it, then suddenly at the top of her lungs, "Where's my ice cream?" Story 34. I was the patient. After my first major abdominal surgery, I was convinced my then BF was a secret undercover liaison between the U.S. government and the League of North American Elves. It was a super important, very secret job. Very few humans were chosen till they learned that Tolkien elves disguise themselves as humans and live among us, although they usually choose to live underground among themselves. I was sad when it wore off. The confused look on his face was priceless, though. Story 35. Not a nurse, but I was under general anesthesia for my vasectomy. I ploppity 15 copay down at the front desk and was more worked up over getting the IV than the actual procedure itself. Anesthesiologist put something in the IV and said, "No worries, it's just water to flush it out." But the room started to go dim. Last thing I remember was saying, "That wasn't water, was it?" And the anesthesiologist smirking. When I came to, I apparently waddled around the urologist's office with my pants around my ankles, hugging the staff and maybe some of the patients as well, thanking doctors and nurses for a job well done. In hindsight, this was probably awkward, as someone probably had to hold my junk out of the way so the doctor could do the work. Regardless, laughter is not the best medicine. Propofol is. Story 36. Not me, but something I witnessed, and that is now one of my most cherished memories. NSFW, which is ironic. It will become clear why. Went in for endoscopy. Nurse saving me up for sedation told me I was her last patient. She was having her own endoscopy and colonoscopy right after me. I come to, doctor gives me the info I need. I'm a bit groggy still. Suddenly a commotion. "Get Russell. Get him in here now." So it's the nurse turned patient. "I need my husband in here now. I need Russell in my pessoa right now." Russell. This is happening at her place of work. Am unsure if I'm hallucinating. The other nurse comes over to take me to my husband who is waiting. She is fighting a laugh with tooth and nail. Is this really happening or am I having some weird reaction? I ask her in earnest. She bursts out laughing. "Oh, it's happening. happening. My husband said that he was thoroughly confused at our expressions as we walked out, since we were both delighted and amused. I would have paid good money to see her walk into work the next day. And Russell? Probably a lucky man. Story 37. When I woke up from my first surgery, I remember asking for my cat over and over again. Only I didn't tell the nurse it was a cat. I was just asking for my Moggs. Second surgery, I brought a stuffed puffin, which apparently was a good choice, BC post-surgery. Me just wanted to snuggle something. Story 38. I am on a support team and spent 12 weeks in various PACUs this year. And the two that stand out the most were a lady who woke up, screamed, and then said, "I forgot I was here." A guy who couldn't see his surgeon walking towards him within earshot, and when the PT was told the doctor was coming to talk to him, he said, "Oh, God, I never liked that guy." Story 39. I woke up screaming, and they gave me more substances immediately and put me on a drip. I went down a K-hole saying, "Oh, I've done this recreationally," to a roar of laughter from the anesthetist. I had a very sore lower back that did not like a 5-hour operation. Story 40. Speaking as a patient, I was terrified before my first surgery, so I was given some kind of anxiety med from my very kind and handsome anesthetist that made me high as a kite. As I was getting ready to be put under, I looked straight at the anesthetist and told him he was really cute and that he'd look great in a crop top and booty shorts. I still remember my surgeon losing his shoot as I was put under. Story 41. As a small child waking from anesthesia, I experienced delirium. I ripped out my IV, screamed like a banshee, and wouldn't let anyone touch me. Bled enough they had to change my gown and wash my long hair. I was really out of it until I saw my mom, and then I climbed up her leg and wouldn't look at anyone. I have had anesthesia many times since, and it has never happened again. Story 42. I was well out of surgery, but while my mom picked up my meds after my wisdom tooth surgery, I wandered around the pharmacy. I convinced her that I absolutely, desperately needed a corncob pipe. I refused to leave without it. Still have the pipe, still have never used it. I remember only seeing it on the rack, nothing else. Apparently, I also woke up sobbing about someone I lost. No one understood what I was saying through my cries. Story 43. I had a surgery to remove a fibroid, and that morning it snowed. Not a blizzard, but enough to be a hassle. My 8 a.m. surgery happened at 1 p.m. The anesthesiologist was really nice before the surgery, so I was shocked that he started laughing really loud when I asked him when the doctor was going to get there. I knew I didn't try hard enough to make sure you were awake. You're all done, and we've been having a great conversation for the past 5 minutes. Story 44. A couple years ago, my mom had surgery after a bad fall, and my dad was waiting in her room for her to come back from the OR. He heard a commotion and lots of giggling in the hallway and peeked out to see what was happening, and saw my mom singing at the top of her lungs, joined by 2 techs and 3 nurses pushing her bed down the hallway. They were having a little parade on their way back to her room. The staff said she was easily the unit favorite, and such a fun person. My mom is a very shy, quiet, gentle person, does not like attention. But post-anesthesia, her inhibitions are gone. She's never drank a drop of adult beverage in her life, so this is as close to tipsy mom as we'll ever get. I didn't get to witness said event, but came close when in October this year, she had surgery to remove a tumor, thymoma, cancer of the thymus. We waited in her room and they brought her in from the PACU. She was in pain and they gave her a bolus of Dilaudid, and about 5 minutes later, the entertainment started. Singing loudly, quoting Hop on Pop from memory, conducting an invisible orchestra, making noises with her mouth, and was boldly sassy. My dad and I were laughing hysterically. I kept thinking the meds would take effect and knock her out and she could rest, but she went on for 3 hours. We have video we will cherish forever. None of the nurses believed us when we told them what a shy and quiet person she normally is. Story 45. I don't remember much about waking up after high hysterectomy. I think I was mostly confused and very groggy, then made it almost to my room when I threw up. But what I do remember of being in the recovery area was the guy next to me was having a very bad time. He was screaming, "Help me, help me! Nurse, help me!" I assume he was either panicking or in a lot of pain or both. I just remember being like, poor dude. Story 46. I had dental surgery with twilight sedation, and they had to bring me to mid-procedure so I would calm down and breathe. I was so confused why I was crying so hard. Once I calmed down a little bit, they put me back out of it, and when I came to after that, I was again crying so hard. I felt embarrassed, and that made me cry even harder. There was no reason in my mind for the crying. I just could not stop crying. Story 47. Had a veteran with PTSD Wake up from general anesthesia convinced we were trying to eliminate him. He tried to pick up his IV pole to swing it at me. Security, other nurses, and meds got the situation under control. Took care of him the next day as well, and he didn't remember it at all. He was very nice and apologized. Story 48. Woke up mid-surgery apologizing to the doctor for getting blood on her, and remembered that later. Last endoscopy was in a city 2 hours away from my home. My beloved but directionally challenged sister drove me home. Didn't know how to work the GPS in my car. She would nudge me. I'd pop up like a prairie dog, look around and say left, right, no, the other lane, etc. As needed, passing back out until nudged again. Amazing that we aren't still roaming around somewhere. Story 49. They were trying to get an IV in my dad when he was loopy from low blood sugar. The make nurse told him to look at pretty nurse so my dad would stop fighting. He said to male nurse, yeah, you're ugly. I apologized to him and he said it happens all the time. Story 50. I had a nurse who after my surgery was pushing me in my wheelchair. She was going around the corners and I felt like we were going fast. So I kept going vroom vroom and she started making the vroom vroom noises with me each time we went around a corner, and it was an amazing thing. Okay, you had to be there. Loved her. Ita. Apparently while she dropped me off at my car, she gave my BF a very concerned look and reminded him to watch me though. Story 51. I had just graduated from nursing school but hadn't yet started work. My MEL broke her femur and the ER staff let me go into the OR as they put in stabilizing screws until her surgery the following day. They told me she was getting ketamine to knock her out. In school, a nurse had told me, however they go to sleep with ketamine is how they wake up. Scared, agitated, happy, calm. So I told MIL to think happy thoughts. She liked food and her son, my husband, was a chef. I told her to think about his cooking. When she started to wake up, she was licking her lips and mumbling about chocolate pie. Story 52. We had a patient who had serotonin syndrome when he was extubated from GA. He got wild, wilder than I've ever seen. Kicking, trying to roll over, swinging, screaming. It took about 8 people to hold him down and to keep him from falling off the procedure table. Anesthesia couldn't put him back to sleep because it would just start over again. They finally gave him propofol to calm him down. Then he got sent to the unit where they gave him IV sedation for about 24 hours. We also had a patient who had undiagnosed sarcoidosis, whose facial skin tore where tape was. He also developed bruising over his chest and back. It was the most horrific thing I'd ever seen. He ended up getting chemotherapy for it and died within a few months. Story 53. As a 20-year-old patient, I woke up and immediately started fighting everyone. I have no recollection, other than a brief memory of looking down at my feet on the bed while people held me down while I was yelling, "You're taking away my agency." Afterwards, while slightly more coherent, I was informed that I had also screamed in what is assumed to be Russian, which I was learning at the time, and repeatedly hollered, "Surgery, surgery, surgery," all whilst being held down by 4 nurses, 2 doctors, and Eric, who was like 6'5" and 250 pounds. They never told me what Eric's job was, but apparently he ended up sitting on my chest, and I punched him in the face. While flailing about, they said I kinked my IV hose, so they couldn't push more knockout juice right away. Also, my gown rode up, and I was flapping in the open air for all to see. The nurse who eventually pushed me in a wheelchair outside to get picked up was one trying to hold me down. Apparently, I managed to lift her entirely off the ground with one hand when she locked her elbows to put all her weight on my wrist. Now, she was pretty petite, but I've never done much lifting. There is 0 chance I could have ever done that sober. Story 54. This is kind of my fault. I was born via C-section, and my mom had to be put under anesthesia. My dad has told me, as my mom was in recovery, she was to have no food or drink whatsoever unless the doctors say it's safe. Dad is waiting by her side, and mom wakes up very groggy. My dad has been given a cup of tea. My mom states she is thirsty and would like a cup of tea as well, very insistently. Dad, you had one just before, Mom. Did I? Dad, yeah, you said it was really good. Mom, well, that's all right then. Then she passed out. Answer, oh man. My first birth, I woke up to my now ex eating a sandwich and drinking a cup of tea. The ridiculous doctor had told everyone I was nil by mouth for my entire labor and delivery, as I looked like I might decide on a C-section. I tell said ex I degaff, and he either shares or he'll need a bed next door to give birth to a cup and saucer. It was the best tea I've ever tipsy. Fast forward 11 years, and I'm in labor with my youngest. Other half-hand feeds me whilst junior doc, first night on labor ward rotation, pats my brow with a wet flannel. Being older and wiser makes the world of difference. The second after I gave birth, Hubby runs to the Costa next door to get me a bottle of freezing cold Diet Coke, and a panini is back before they've even had chance to finish weighing our little potato. Story 55. Not a nurse, but a patient. I had a lumbar fusion at age 19. 2008, 12-inch incision. For some reason, I remember the first 60 seconds of waking from anesthesia, but I can't recall the next 24 hours. Anyway, I woke up moving my legs, like shifting them up and down, side to side, like I was trying to keep from falling down a slide. I didn't feel pain, just a weird discomfort. The recovery ward nurse happened to be sitting next to me filling out paperwork when she noticed me shifting around. She says, "Hey, sweetie, you awake?" Me, "Yeah." "Oh, okay, good. You should stop moving your legs before you hurt yourself, okay? Now go back to sleep." Me, "Okay." Fast forward 24, I wake up in a private recovery room and immediately start to projectile vomit. Got nauseous from the anesthetic. Worst pain ever. Followed closely by the feeling you get when you haven't pooped in 7 straight days. Story 56. The last time I went under a few months back, when I came to, I shook my head and shouted a little woo and felt totally fine and back to normal. It was totally different when I was very young and felt quite scared and upset until I heard my mother's footsteps. I think it's because I was totally aware of what was going on before and after and had no lack of confidence when being put to sleep. The doctor next to me looked like he didn't know what to do. He was like, "We're going to wait until you are feeling okay, but you seem fine, so I guess you can go back to the ward." Added a little extra to the story. Story 57. I had knee surgery. It was outpatient, and my surgeon was running late. So I hadn't eaten after midnight the night before for a 9 a.m. surgery, wasn't taken in until about 1 p.m. Well, I was hungry by that time, and being put under didn't change that. Woke up repeatedly trying to order Chinese food from the very amused nurse. Spareless bone ribs, aimed right rice, boneless spare ribs, and white rice. My mom very nicely picked some up for me on the way home. Story 58. Upon waking from an emergency C-section and groggily checking with my mom that baby was doing well, I was greeted at my bedside by the hot, blonde Australian anesthetist who asked how I was feeling and made sure my morphine pump was good to go before he left. "Oh my God, he was gorgeous!" I exclaimed to my mom, who just grinned awkwardly. "No, really, did you see him?" Hot, blonde Australian anesthetist then quietly laughed from the end of my bed. I wanted to crawl out of my skin with shame when he came to check up on me again the next day. Story 59. Rad tech, not a nurse but a coworker, and I went to do x-rays on a post-reduction of this gentleman in the emergency department. The patient said he told him he wasn't easy to knock out. When we nicely mentioned they had already reduced his shoulder, he didn't believe us. We pointed out that his arm was now in a sling and he was shocked. He then proceeded to tell us how much he loved his wife and how amazing she is. As he is confessing his love, a woman walks up behind us. We took that as our cue to leave. I really hope that was his wife and that she was able to hear how deeply in love her husband was with her. If it wasn't, then I'm glad we left when we did. Story 60. After my colonoscopy, I woke up thinking the anesthesiologist, male, was my mom waking me up. I think I only thought this because my dad woke me up to drive me to get a colonoscopy at 5:00 a.m., and I was extremely out of it, as I only had about 30 minutes of sleep, and it was a deep sleep too. My dad thought I was dead. Not to mention, my mom always wakes me up asking me if I want this mascara she just got, or to let a cat into my room. Story 61. I worked with an anesthesiologist that loved giving ketamine to everyone. He gave ketamine to an outpatient colonoscopy. Well, dude rolled into PACU all happy, talking about the wonderful beach, how the water was warm. This man truly thought he was at the beach. By the time they locked the brakes of his stretcher in my bay, he was cursing and screaming that the sharks were about to get him. He sat up and tried to stand in the stretcher. Thankfully, he only got to his knees. I mean, this man really thought there was a shark, and there was no convincing him otherwise. Doing all of this, he ran his BP up and started having chest pain. He ended up with a stat cardiology consult and a stay overnight. What all of this for an outpatient colonoscopy? Story 62. Not a nurse, but I still have guilt for this one 30 years later. I was 17, waking up from dental surgery. I began bullying the larger teen next to me, also just waking up. Called him Tubby, Homer, told him to have another donut, a dozen times easy, and calling him a private area jerk, meanie for crying. The sweetest nurse told me I was ready and would call my ride, then discharge me. She turned around. I ripped out the IV and blood squirted towards Homer, making him scream, then cry uncontrollably. I have no recollection of this and was told to me by my ride home, then confirmed by the dentist. I think about this kid all the time and really hope he was too drugged up to remember. If not, I'm sorry for any trauma I may have caused. Story 63. Not a nurse, but one time my brother had an oral surgery where he had to be awake. He took a couple edibles beforehand, plus the nitrous, and that got him. I'm always scared too, and it really does suck. Halfway through the operation, the oral surgeon's body started breaking up and floating away like when Mike TV went inside the Wonka vision. Original movie, not the Depp one, Shums. My brother screamed, "Your genes are disintegrating," and had a minor freak out in the chair. Substances are weird. He said the surgeon was pretty cool and they were able to finish the procedure. Nurses are amazing. So much love for y'all. Answer: he took a couple edibles beforehand, plus the nitrous, and that got him. Obligatory. Never, ever take substances before anesthesia. And be completely honest with doctors about substances, legal or not, you take. ER docs and anesthesiologists are not going to narc on you. They just need to make sure the anesthesia meds don't react with anything you took eliminate you. Story 64. I was a patient. As a teenager, I had to get 10 baby teeth pulled because they refused to dislodge on their own, and I needed braces. Thus, surgery was needed. According to my mom, I was sobbing uncontrollably and continuously saying that I wanted to go home. It did not matter how much I was consulted. Tears, tears, more tears, and I want to go home on loop for a solid hour or 3. Even when I got home, like I wanted, it took a bit for my brain to catch up because I was still sobbing to my mom on how much I wanted to go home, LOL. Story 65. I woke up on the operating table before the procedure. I heard a female voice right next to me saying something that made me open my eyes and look at her. She looked surprised and said, "Oh, he's awake." I looked over to where she was looking, and the surgeon was looking at x-rays or something with another nurse, and he said, "Don't mind her, she's our resident pervert." I told myself that I need to remember this when I wake up. The only thing I can't remember was what the first nurse said. I woke up in recovery after, to 2 nurses talking about a strike like it was a done deal, and I just started laughing. My substances addled brain imagined them walking out on strike and leaving us all to wake up on our own. Somehow that was hilarious to me. Story 66. Patient here. When I was like 7 or 8, I had my adenoids out and tubes in my ears. Apparently, as I was waking up, I was very unhappy, and it took like 5 nurses to restrain me. I ripped through the hospital PJs and bit one nurse pretty good. I was also attempting to scream for my mom right after throat surgery, so that was not good. The nurses were definitely glad when I went home. Story 67. When I was in my first placement in nursing school, we had a patient on the ward come to and start strangling the nurse. When the other staff managed to pull him off, he somehow got a fire extinguisher and threw it at the doctor's head. Apparently it was some kind of post-anesthesia psychosis. I don't remember the name now, but was really terrifying. Story 68. Coming out from wisdom teeth surgery, I was insanely furious that the nurse wouldn't remove the cannula. Only last week I awoke from surgery sobbing uncontrollably. Through gasps, I asked the nurse to sob, "Please hold my hand," sob. I remember it was so warm. I think I had gotten cold as I was out for 5 hours. Story 69. Man, these funny stories are making me jealous. When I woke up from surgery, I was sobbing uncontrollably, and I remember pushing my hand into my face really hard and the nurse trying to soothe me. They knocked me back out with pain meds, and when I woke up, the nurse said, "I don't know what that anesthesiologist did to y'all girls, but every single one of you woke up sobbing." Endosurgeries. Story 70. When I had my colonoscopy and endoscopy, the anesthetist said, "I'll give you a little something before we get started." A minute later, I say, "There it is, woo," and them laughing. Next thing, I'm waking up and telling the nurse to just write everything down instead of talking to me because I won't remember anything. Story 71. Patient. Wisdom tooth removal under anesthesia. Woke up on the couch at home, did not know how I got there, put my hand in my pant pocket, and pulled out a hermetically sealed bag of blood-stained teeth, to my horror. I was then informed that while I was going under, I insisted on bringing my teeth home, and I also told the doctor that my arms have druggy veins, which should make things easier for them. Yep. Story 72. I'm curious for nurses in here, what percentage of patients are loopy versus fully aware and functional when they come to? I've always been totally coherent the second my eyes are open and wondering how common that is. It's been fine for procedures where I can talk after and folks can see I'm lucid and fine, but I remember wanting to take down my mother after I came to post-wisdom teeth surgery. Couldn't talk for obvious reasons with cotton stuffed in my mouth, and she kept acting like I was high as a kite, which drove me batty. Even tried to get me to use a straw to drink, while I'm furiously trying to find a pen and paper to write down that the doctor explicitly said not to use straws to reduce dry socket risk. Story 73. On the way into surgery, I was given something good and asked my mom if we could grow plant substance at home. When she said yes, I was super happy, then super offended, saying, "Are you just saying yes because I won't remember?" Which, to be fair, I didn't remember until she told me. She did also let me grow plant substance at home. Story 74. The nurse was checking on me after I woke up from having an endoscopy, and I asked her if she was aware that from your mouth to your anus is one long tube. And when I was waking up from wisdom tooth surgery, I asked them if they offered a therapy monkey. Story 75. I do work in healthcare, but as a patient, waking up from gastric surgery, the first thing I asked was, "How's my liver?" And everyone laughed and the surgeon told me it was fine. From my perspective, I had been on a special liver shrinking diet for weeks and was told that if my liver was too big, they would stop the surgery. So that was top of my mind. About 10 weeks ago, I had joint replacement surgery. I asked them to put me out before I got into the OR, but either the meds or the anesthesiologist weren't fast enough. I do remember them putting on the BP curve and EKG leads, and then the anesthesiologist asking me to stop helping. Next thing I knew, I was in the recovery room with a hot nurse. I can't believe I was trying to help. Story 76. Not a nurse, but a patient. I had gastric bypass that had severe complications, leading to a 1-month coma, multiple surgeries until my organs were falling apart. Decision was made to stop. Let me either pull through or die. I did improve. They moved me to the regular hospital floor after ICU. I'm sure I've been awake to some degree, but for my memories, I recall the day of the original surgery, going to sleep after trying to tell nurses something wasn't right. Then I was where they moved me after the coma 1 month later. I was scared no one was in my room. I couldn't remember who I was. Many people suffer delusions after the coma anesthesia. I was in full-blown hysteria delusion. Finally, a nurse came in to my screams, seemed to think I was being difficult on purpose. She was very annoyed with me, apparently thinking I was being purposely difficult. I don't know if she actually had no clue that I was waking from a coma. I don't think she did, but she really got mad when I called 911. Again, I was delusional. Terrified, somehow didn't know my name or the date. I have been terrified of delusions from dementia ever since because I very clearly recall these things the feel. In my delusion, there was a ghost in that hospital room, and I had proof, believed the evil nurse was helping the ghost. My proof was a handful of paper clips, all bitten in half, because some weird logic thought this is definitely ghost activity. The cops were able to figure things out. While I am embarrassed for that time, I have no guilt for annoying the nurse. She should have known what was happening. My terror was escalated by her behavior. Story 77. A nurse, but not my niece's nurse. She woke up from surgery and a nurse asked if she wanted a popsicle. While the nurse is away, my niece started eating her popsicle. Only the nurse had not given her a popsicle yet, but she was eating an invisible popsicle. Story 78. All I know is that some nurse out there has a story about me. I had to get cataract surgery at the age of 36. Long story, but let me tell you, get a second opinion if they ever tell you it's probably just floaters. And I was very worried about it because you have to stay awake for it and be able to follow orders. But as far as I was aware, I was completely unconscious and woke up from it just fine. Went back the next day to get the bandage off and thanked the doctor for making sure I was really out of it and that it must have gone well, and he went very quiet and actually lost a little color and was all, "Oh no, you weren't out for that. We ended up having to give you twice the normal amount of substance." I asked if I wanted to know, and he said, no, you absolutely do not. Story 79. Not a nurse, but I am to this day convinced that when I woke up after my meniscus op 3 months ago and the nurse put on the brace, I screamed at the entire room, "You fudge cunts. Be careful, you cunts. My meniscus is freshly operated." They were super friendly, though, and even though I asked multiple times and apologized, they insisted I did no such thing. Story 80. I'm not a nurse, but I shattered my pinky and had pins placed in surgery. I came to while being rolled to my room. Right when I came to, I started bawling. I'm not sure why. When I finally calmed down, I asked the nurse, why did I cry? Still drugged up. She said it's a natural reaction. I looked it up later. It's apparently common, but too many variables to tell exactly why it happens. Story 81. I was the patient, not the nurse. I had my Leap Done Deck 2024, and the first thing I did waking up was tell the nurses it felt like I had chlamydia. 5 minutes later, I flashed my coochie to everyone in that recovery room when I was trying to put the ice pack on. The nurse closed my legs so quick. Story 82. Not a nurse, but I was given morphine after my son was born because I had a C-section. It was apparently supposed to make me go to sleep, but it made me hyper as FCK, and I could not stop talking. To the point that they took me out of recovery and up to a room because I was disturbing the other patients who were properly recovering. Got off the elevator and my mom was waiting in my room. She said she could hear me as soon as the elevator opened. The following day, my doctor shared that he put morphine allergy in my chart, even though it is nowhere near a true allergy. I make sure to tell any new medical providers that I am allergic. It was not an awful experience by any means, more embarrassing than anything, but I do not care to repeat the experience. Story 83. I was fairly awake and back to normal when I woke up from endosurgery. I asked, "Are we done?" "Yes, Miss Annie, we're all done. You did great." "Oh, wow, great job, everyone." I was obviously high as a kite, but I'm glad I was super polite to everyone. No different than my usual self, except the politeness was turned up to 11. Story 84. Patient in CICU from VFI. Event during COVID. No family allowed in hospitals, so staff didn't know I was extremely claustrophobic. Apparently, I wasn't sedated enough, woke up and immediately extubated myself, pulled out the trach tube, freaked the staff out. I, however, have no memory of doing it. Story 85. I had to have emergency gallbladder removal surgery, and from the moment I was waking up from anesthesia to when I was brought into the hospital room, I kept requesting a Big Mac. I don't know why, since I have not had a Big Mac in decades, and still have not since then either. Story 86. I went into the recovery room after my husband had surgery, and he had taken all his surgery gowns off. They were hanging on his IV line, and the nurse was trying to cover his bits with a blanket. He was super happy, and everyone in the room was laughing at his jokes and demeanor, except the poor old lady at her husband's recovery bed next to him who didn't know where to look. Story 87. My husband has his wisdom teeth removed and elected to be under general anesthesia. When I went to pick him up, the dental surgeon told me that when he was waking up, he thought he was high on shrooms or acid and kept asking which one he had taken. I told him on the ride home, and he was mortified, LOL. Story 88. I had to get a colonoscopy in 2023, and before my scope, I read a comment on SM that said the prep just shoots out your butt like a garden hose. That comment was so hilarious to me that I remember laughing when I woke up afterwards with my arms in the air saying, "Shoot out your butt like a garden hose." Story 89. My now husband had to be rushed to the emergency room when we were in college, and he was put under and then put on some pretty strong pain meds, so he was super out of it. He wouldn't shut up about how much he loved both me and our bearded dragon, and his heart just couldn't handle all that love. Story 90. Not a nurse, but I was working in EVS as a floor guy at a hospital about 10 years ago. I was moving some stuff for a job and passed through post-op as a woman was waking up from surgery. She looked at her nurse, also a woman, and went into great detail about what she'd like to do to her if she wasn't married. She got a bit weepy and said she loved her husband, but the nurse was so pretty that she couldn't help herself. Everybody else was having a quiet chuckle about it, and I was sternly reminded that I wasn't to share any details with anybody. Story 91. Me, I was the patient. Got pretty sedated for a dental procedure one time. Apparently, once I was settled, the dentist announced he was ready to start, at which point I said, "Very well, carry on, my good man. I'm off to walk the brain corgis," and promptly passed out for the remainder of the procedure. The dental assistant said the dentist had to take a step back and have a good howl of laughter before carrying on and doing the job at hand. Once I had woken up and was getting cleaned up to go home, we had a discussion on how many corgis the queen had at the time, if she still walked them, and what would happen if they all sprang off in separate directions while out on the moor walking. Anesthesia is wild, man. Story 92. I have a distinct memory of waking up, telling a nurse about how it was weird how both Nightwing and Invincible have black, blue, and yellow costumes, both have the last name Grayson, and were both violation by women, then everything fading back to black. Story 93. As a kid going under general anesthesia for the first time, I took the nurses super literally when they said I could go to recovery when I woke up and could answer 3 basic questions: name, location, what I wanted. Evidently, I woke early, spit out the answers rapid fire without waiting for the actual questions, and then hit the freak out button when my recovery nurse said no. They had to knock me back out. Second waking went better. Story 94. Patient here. Don't remember much before this moment. Heard one of the nurses pushing my cart. She's raising her hand, and I shouted, "Thank you all so much for taking care of me," at the highest volume I could muster. Definitely remember snickering. Definitely remember being told to put my hand down now and someone gently coaxing my hand back onto the bed. Context: I am 5'0" nothing in a house of 6'0" people who are very chatty and all have a naturally loud cadence. The only way I get a word in sometimes is if I raise my hand first. LOL. Story 95. Patient here, and not exactly anesthesia. In the 1980s, I was in for double pneumonia, and the IV contained some strong meds that provided a burning sensation. I was told. I jumped up in bed and began attempting to rip out the IV. It took multiple nurses to restrain me from injuring myself. They called me the dream child for the rest of my stay, as the head nurse was a Nightmare on Elm Street fan and I, 8 years old. Story 96. After my wisdom tooth removal, I apparently was not acting right. My mom described it as acting wild, but never elaborated. What I remember is crying inconsolably, being told I can't go home until I stop, which made me cry harder because I didn't think I was allowed to go home. They eventually brought my mom back, who was able to calm me down. Now I just throw up. Every time, no matter what, my body will find something to purge. Story 97. I've had multiple dental issues. The first started when I was very young. I had to get several teeth pulled. The dentist showed me the teeth afterward with the roots attached and said those with one big root were girl teeth because they looked like they wore a dress, and the ones with more than one root were boy teeth. Fast forward to when I get my wisdom teeth removed and waking up. Apparently, I kept asking the staff if they took out my girl teeth or my boy teeth. They and my husband were understandably confused, horrified. Story 98. Patient here. After I'd had my wisdom teeth removed, I kept trying to write down the pet care instructions for my now ex-husband because I was stressed out he would do it wrong. I had geriatric animals that I was the primary caretaker of and apparently didn't trust him. Later, I looked at the notes and it was all scribbles. Story 99. Not a nurse, but when I had my wisdom teeth taken out, I apparently told the nurse that she was wonderful and that I'd be sure to write her a glowing review on Yelp many times in the short time my friend and boyfriend were helping me to the car. I was 19 and had never used Yelp before. That was around 10 years ago at this point, and it's still the only Yelp review I've ever made. When my best friend was driving me home, I apparently loudly said to my boyfriend that I wanted to make out. And when he told me that we probably couldn't do that for a little while until I fully healed, I was very disappointed. Story 100. This was me. I woke up from getting pain shots in my back, and I kept asking what time it was. In German, multiple ways. I hadn't spoken German since college 10 years previously and couldn't figure out why no one would tell me, wie spät ist es? Was ist deine Zeit auf us? Entschuldigung, wie spät ist es? Finally, my roommate, No, who was in the other room to be my ride-along, checked her translator and helped out. Story 101. When I was 11, I had pretty heavy ear surgery, and I woke up in terror and crying. I was thrashing around and yelling that I had to pee, and they cut off my underwear, gave me a bedpan, and then I couldn't pee. They got my mom, and I realized what was going on and was embarrassed and calmed down. Had a reconstruction checkup surgery about a year later. Woke up, looked at the clock, asked for another blanket. Story 102. I was walking through PACU, level 1 recovery, general anesthesia patients, and a surgeon was the actual patient himself recovering from a procedure. He was brilliant, but known for having a bad temper. And my first day, I caught his wrath in a room, so I was quite wary around him my first few years. In subsequent years, he calmed down a lot, but his previous temper rep still preceded him with some crowds. So, he's pretty doped up, and I go to his gurney and he says, in a super mopey voice, "Why doesn't anyone LASIK me?" I said, "Because you're a jerk." He got all teary and said, "I just want everyone to leak me." I laughed and said, "I like you all the same, so we're good." He remembers none of this, but after that, when he wanted to escape or didn't feel well, he'd always hide out in my office and we'd just hang out. He also helped save my life right before I retired. I miss that AH. Story 103. My 12-year-old son woke up screaming, "What the fudge?" over and over. He wasn't scared, he was just screaming it. When calming him down, he looked at me and widened his eyes and asked me if I was a baboon. The nurse responded to him, "I think you mean an orangutan." It was my turn to look at her horrified. I'm a ginger. Story 104. Redhead here, woke up from a cholecystectomy in searing white-hot pain. I started screaming at fudge hurts. I reached the legal safe limit of fentanyl fascist. It took over an hour for the nurses to calm me down enough to bring my husband back. And when it was time for us to leave, I almost divorced him while he helped me get dressed. And all the feel-nice meds had worn off by the time I had gotten home. I vividly remember him slamming on the brakes, not paying attention to traffic, and sobbing to him that I was going to divorce him for that. Story 105. Patient here. Not actually a regret. I needed an emergency cholecystectomy. All they'd give me was IV morphine, which barely dented the pain. I repeated this ad nauseum. Dilaudid isn't in our formulary, was their mantra. New Mexico medical providers are fudged backward, and I will maintain that under oath, and until the day I die. I finally hollered, "Give me a fudge double dose of the IV morphine, bring me a leather strap to bite on, a bottle of iodine, and a scalpel, and I'll get started while you finish beating yourself off or whatever not surgery thing it is you're doing instead of getting me into the OR." The surgeon dislocated my left shoulder under anesthesia and lied about it. Kept telling me the first 12 weeks post-op that it was because they'd inflated my abdomen to assist the laparoscope, which was bullshit. And I told him that every time that dirty cockroach brought it up. Dude actually wore the same disgusting lab coat every time I saw him, both pre and post-op. It had a very distinctively shaped blood stain, questionable other yellowing stains that frankly looked like either snot or semen, and the cuffs, neck, and hem were fraying. His personal hygiene was atrocious. He shaved unevenly, used toilet paper to stop cuts on his face and neck, and always smelled of sweat, stale booze, and halitosis. I was always fighting the urge to look around suspiciously in case he came at me with a rusty scalpel. Can't remember his actual name because I instantly dubbed him Sweeney Todd. Story 106. Was put under while having my wisdom teeth removed when I was 19. Woke up crying, and the nurse told me she couldn't bring my mom back until I settled down. So I did. And when my mom came back, finally, I told her the nurse was mean to me and had hit me. Story 107. I had a C-sec, so I wasn't fully under, but after they cut her out, I asked if my stomach was flat now. I completely forgot I had a baby. Later on, I was so embarrassed I couldn't look anyone in the face in case they were in the operating room and heard me. I will never live that down. Story 108. At the time of my procedure requiring anesthesia, I had just started a new job, getting permits for new home builds with a Hugh Volume builder. My first sentence waking up was, "I'll have your permits tomorrow." So glad I'm not dealing with that stress any longer. Story 109. Patient here. When I was 8, I had my tonsils and adenoids removed, tubes put in my ears, and an intestinal hernia repaired. Yes, all at the same time. Apparently, when I woke up, I kicked a lot and kicked my dad in the face, bloodying his nose. No recollection. I've never had any problems waking from anesthesia since. Story 110. Not a nurse, but I had endoscopy colonoscopy a few years ago. Apparently, after they started running the anesthesia meds into my IV, I started telling the nurse about the end of my relationship with my ex. When the nurse came to check on me when I woke up and asked what snacks I wanted, she said, "Oh, by the way, please don't call X's name." I was mortified. Story 111. I broke 3 metatarsal bones in my foot and needed surgery. After my procedure, my husband was talking to the surgeon right outside of the recovery room. Someone was wailing and screaming like the zombie apocalypse was underway, and my husband kept glancing at the doors in a concerned kind of way, and the surgeon said, "That's your wife. She will be okay once the anesthesia wears off." Story 112. I saw a guy rub his balls and then rub his eyes with giant metal finger splints on when waking up from a kidney stone removal surgery. The first assist started yelling at him, "Don't rub your eyes. Stop it. You'll scratch your cornea." Then he rubbed his nuts again. Story 113. I'm so curious how so many patients remember their stories, or how so many family members, friends witness these moments. In my experiences with my health issues, I've had a few, I recall nothing and was not returned to family friends until I was past those out-of-it moments. I do recall being rushed to wake up and be ready to go. Most recently, after a full hysterectomy, I was sent home within a couple of hours after it was done, but no recollection or witness of to the post-anesthesia shenanigans. Story 114. I was barely waking up from wisdom teeth removal at 35, and the nurse was telling my husband what I could eat. I waved to get her attention and then started spelling out in ASL yogurt and I think smoothies. Luckily, she knew a bit of ASL too and confirmed that yes, I can eat yogurt and I can have smoothies if there's no seeds or straws. I haven't used the ASL alphabet in many years. I started to learn it over 25 years ago and hadn't really used it since. Story 115. I still don't fully know why, but I woke up from my appendectomy and immediately started yelling about how I had to wake up. I was late for working and going to be fired. But the weird thing is I was strapped into the bed, so I ended up pulling a muscle in my neck from trying to get up. Story 116. The first time I was anesthetized as a kid, I tried to beat the shoot out of my anesthesiologist. They called an orderly to hold me down better, and I tried to beat him up too until I faded out. It wasn't normal for me at all. I actually liked the anesthesiologist until a little after I started breathing in the gas. Story 117. As an OR tech years ago, we were talking about the scrub nurse getting a car during an appy. She was deciding between a Honda or Volkswagen. Patient comes to on the way to recovery and says, "Don't get the VW," and started listing all the recalls for that model. We were all looking at each other like WTF and glad that the conversation was appropriate, not the raunchy, twisted conversations that sometimes happen. Story 118. Okay, now, I'm feeling way more chill about when I woke up from surgery a few years